Hello, welcome to the Dark Path podcast. Today I am lucky to be have a guest in to do an interview with me. This is Lucas Gaudette. So hello Lucas, how are you doing?
Well, thanks.
Good. So welcome and thank you for taking some time out to chat.
Mm-hmm.
If you'd like to introduce yourself, a little bit about your background, and
Sure.
Go from there.
Cool. My background is kind of varied in the sense that I'm interested in a lot of different things in life. I've spent most of my time kind of moving around a little bit and exploring different hobbies, mostly having to do with the arts and technical things. I'm definitely a hands-on kind of person, but also a bit of a brainiac. Yeah, like in terms of my work has followed that as well. Just anywhere, mostly design work, but then spent time doing car detailing. But I've also worked with children on the autism spectrum, teenagers. A lot of work with youth a little bit earlier on, which was really cool. I like doing art. I've done art my whole life. So that is to say mostly drawing, pencil drawings, some computer artwork, painting and whatnot. I'm a musician. I took a lot of interest in the martial arts. I took interest in kind of experimenting with different ways of doing life. Minimalism being one of those experiments. I've moved many times, like over 60 times. Yeah. And some of them not my own initiative, but mostly of my own volition. I like to change the scene a lot because for me, changing the scene means perspective. So that's cool.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, I know that we met because you do website design, and so you helped me with both incarnations of the dojo website.
Yeah.
And that's been great. But I also know that you have some interesting sort of art projects that have been percolating for quite a while in various realms. So I thought maybe you want to talk a bit about that part of your
Sure.
thing.
Yeah. For the longest time, I've been into doing sort of cartoon artwork, kind of like Japanese anime kind of style stuff, but they're my own figures, depicting sexy women, but sexy women that are sexy because they are comfortable with themselves. They're self-appreciating figures. And so that's been a really fun thing to portray, and it brings up a lot of interesting conversation. It's very triggering for a lot of people, also really positive for people who are receptive. It's one of the projects.
Yeah. So I know you talked about that one a while back there. It is very interesting in that sense. I was wondering maybe if you wanted just flesh out a little bit. Like, did you grow up in BC? Did you move out from somewhere else? From around here?
Yeah, I'm from Ontario, Windsor.
Okay.
So I pretty much came from a factory town and moved to the opposite of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a story that we get out here in BC quite a
Right?
bit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm one of the many.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to blame you. It's I understand that story. So what got you interested in exploring, because I hear two things. I hear the artistic interest, but I also hear the technical interest, right? So I know that you're really good with the website design stuff, the technical end of that, because that's you're who I go to for that, of course.
Yeah.
So you have those things, but you also have these artistic expressions that you want to do. So how do you see those things kind of co-balancing each other? Do you see them co-balancing each other?
I do kind of. I see the computer work that I do. I mean, websites are obviously, to a great degree artistic. But when it comes to the technical end of things, especially when providing technical support and problem solving and stuff like that, I've always kind of attributed that as sort of like satisfying my left brain functions and artistic my right brain functions. So
you have a sense of the balance of left-right brain in that context.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
And do you feel like you need to express both of them in order to find a sort of the balance in yours generally?
Yeah, gotta do a bit of both.
Yeah. Okay, well that's good, because that then means that you have a perspective in which you're looking at life, trying to figure out how to find not just the things that initially are self-gratification processes, but what's the bigger thing going on? Where's the balance coming from? Because it has to come from a degree of variance in some degree in that sense. So in terms of the technical end of your interests there, it's like computers and programs and this kind of thing. Is that right?
It's a big part of it, yeah. Yeah. Probably the most part.
Okay.
Yeah. I like tinkering and I like building things. Yeah, I like modifying things. It's actually my favorite thing to do. Modifying a motorcycle, modifying.
Right, doing the motorcycles, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like doing modifications usually to do with small technical changes. Lights or things that optimize what I'm doing, installing tire pressure sensor system, just things like that, right? Or or modifying my seat and carving it out to be comfortable in a certain way that suits the functions of how I use the bike.
And this is in the aim of trying to make it more efficiency out of the bike, or just more aesthetic beauty out of the...
Both are equally important.
Right.
For me, if you're going to be good at something, you should know how to do it in a way that looks good.
Yeah. I agree with that.
If the aliens came to this planet, they probably wouldn't have a junk piece of shit. It
probably look nice. Right.
Yeah, it probably look pretty cool.
Yeah. That's a good point, actually. Yeah. And at that level of technology, it would have to look good, you'd think, because it would just be because the aesthetic would have to merge at some point.
Yeah. If you're going to have that sensibility, the aesthetic has to come into it somewhere. Exactly.
That's an interesting point.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's interesting too, because that's a world where the functionality and the artistic world sort of do meet, is in those types of things.
Right in the middle, yeah.
So in terms of how you've sort of found your balance with that, did you have an intuition about it initially when you were a teenager? You just knew you were going to go and find these things to do this, or is this something you put together over the course of your life, or how does that?
It's just been innate, honestly. Like my whole life, I've always been like building little inventions and putting things together and modifying things and drawing things. And
has there always been a sort of an interest in a bunch of variety of things too?
Yeah. So where would I start on that? Like I'm just really interested in scientific things, of course, just because what's the nature of life, right?
Yeah.
Studying just anything to do with spiritual ideas of whatever it be, exploring meditation and different ways of seeing things in terms of, I don't know, it's important for me to find a way to see humanity such that I can coexist with the rest of humanity in a way that's actually wholesome and fulfilling, rather than just tolerating or whatnot. So that's a thing that I'm interested in. What else? Just any random skill that I can pick up. Oftentimes, people like someone's just offering to learn a skill, like shooting guns. Like, yeah, hell yeah, I took a course on that. I think that a lot of what limits me in my learning is just like funds to go off and just on a tangent. If I could live forever or for a really, really long time and given enough funds, like I just spend lifetimes getting good at all kinds of different skills.
Yeah. That's cool. Yeah. That's cool. So within all of that, you mentioned the idea of the desire to pursue how your engagement in the world develops, and there's an inherent benefit to people's ability to develop skills. So if you have any skill, that generally will help the world to some degree because they're doing something that has functionality in some way.
Sure. Yeah.
So how do you think that the drive you have to sort of seek those things? How do you see that connected to the importance of your role in society in that sense? Do you think about that, or do you just pursue the thing you're interested in and then see where that leads?
No, it's always been both.
You've been aware of both in that sense.
Yeah, for sure. Like I'm aware of the intent to do both.
Mm-hmm.
So mostly in terms of following my own thing and doing art, for example, my intent with that is to share a sense of well-being or share, really to enrich life for.
Yeah, and this is what I'm trying to get at a little bit. Because as an artistic person, there's the benefit to yourself in expressing the art, but then there's a benefit to the community when the art is well expressed.
Yeah.
But it has to be somewhat well expressed, right?
It's just that's kind of the point. It's like getting good at communicating.
Yes. So this is something that I think is really a big part of this. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if that was what I'm trying to, how do I frame this? So if that is the idea of how you sort of manage your path in life, is you've pursued a lot of different interests, they're all connected in some way to one of two main categorical things, like artistic expression versus technical know-how, but they merge together, right? So that you can put a website together, say, and make it look really nice and function well.
Yeah.
And then that also increases the benefit into the community. that path and doing that in your life isn't the normal one in the context of like you didn't just graduate from high school, go to college, get a very standardized sort of office job and just stick it out at that. There is a desire to walk somewhat on a different path in that sense. So that's a big part of what this podcast is about, is and it's called The Dark Path, but it's the path is the first part of that to me, is this path that a person individually decides to walk. He says, I'm going to go and take my life where I want it to go, rather than just sort of where the wind blows me that I have no real thought over. And so I want to get into a bit about what the dark element of that is. But for now, though, just to go back to the idea of that path, what have you reflected on that in terms of like other people walking very, prescribed paths versus the fact that you've had a very different approach to that? Has that ever been a challenge for you? Do you feel like you're a bit of an outsider sometimes, that kind of thing?
Yeah, like 100% of the time.
Is that okay though? Like,
it's fine.
Yeah, you're okay with
fine. Yeah. I feel like I just feel like my perspective is unique and what I can offer is different because what I'm choosing is different. And so I'm able to, just offer something unique and I think valuable, especially to people who also feel like they need to kind of create their own deal. And not to say that people that take prescribed paths aren't doing so consciously necessarily. Sure. Some days I wish I could just be a fireman and I'm done. I'm happy. But no, it's never going to happen for me. So that's okay, So it's almost like not having the choice to do anything otherwise. Because I've tried that. I didn't go to college to do the standard thing at all. But I have had many regular jobs, full-time jobs, desk jobs. Doing the 9 to 5 and whatnot. And I discovered pretty quickly that wasn't for me.
Yeah. So but that's great because I'm very similar in my way in that sense. But what I want to try to share with people too is this idea that it takes a certain amount of self-confidence to step out on your own in that way. And people often hesitate. Yeah. Even if they know what they want to pursue, they have a passion for something, but the security of the 9 to 5 holds them into that. So is there anything that you might want to say in that context of like having the confidence to step out and just do what you are drawn to doing?
Definitely. Yeah. There's probably a lot I could say about it. Yeah. But like, all right, how are you for time?
We're okay.
Okay, cool.
I'll watch it.
Okay, cool. Okay, in one way, like for me, it wasn't a choice. In a way, like it was a choice, but it wasn't a choice because I realized that I couldn't do the other version. Like I couldn't do the regular version. It was just not doable for me. I couldn't function within the confines of like regular jobs. Let's just use jobs as an example. Careers or whatever. I'm definitely not completely neurotypical. So the way I function is like a puzzle to most people. So if I have a boss over my shoulder, it just I count job after job after job in like so many different categories. It was part of me trying different things too. It's just like I discovered there was one thread of truth throughout the whole thing, which is like they don't get you and they're gonna you're gonna annoy them. So I think I need to do my own thing. Yeah. That was part of it. So in that way, I wasn't like, all right, I decided to settle bravely. I did, but it almost reluctantly, in a way. Yeah. But it was just like looking at the truth of what was going on, and being like, this is not working. Yeah, what will work? Maybe I need to do the thing. So in that, I think came a determination to be like, well, this is the path I'm going on, so it has to work. Right. So it's almost like I have to choose faith. That's good. Yeah. So at the end of that was really interesting that you're talking about how you came to walk your path, not because you made not because it was like a real fair choice between different routes that were equally valid in a certain sense, but because it's just who you are. Yeah. So that innate expression of yourself had to be honored because you knew that not doing that just wouldn't work. And that's a lot of interesting elements there. But at the end, you mentioned there has to be a certain amount of faith. Yeah. And I think that's a really interesting, really important point because in terms of many things in the world,
people have, like right now, there's this over-reliance on saying, well, just trust science. Now, science is very important, and I don't want to take anything away from that. But science does not give us morality, and it doesn't give us the proper interactive behavioral modes that we need to get along.
Between humans, yeah.
So the science gives us information. We need the information, I believe, very much.
Yeah.
We need clear information, too, which is another thing, information. But that guidance of what I would call morality is related to me to the idea of a person pursuing their own actual path. Mm-hmm. Because the mechanism in which you know that this is what you need to do for yourself is not one you can weigh out and judge in an externalized way. It's an internal knowledge. And so curious if you have any thoughts on like where does that even come from in terms of a person?
Good question. Good questions. I mean, it's like stuff I think about all the time. It's always being revised, but like, is there an intrinsic self? I mean, that's like a big question right there. I think there is. Definitely, like from my experience, there's an intrinsic evolving but unchanging self, kind of.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I just actually posted a talk I wrote out for just myself for the podcast, and it was on compassion in many ways and how it relates to many things. Yeah. One of the things I talked about was, I don't know if you've heard of Maslow's pyramid of hierarchy of needs. And the highest one is the need, and I thought it was interesting that he used the word need for self-actualization. And so, and that couldn't even be something you could dream about if you didn't have a sense of what your path is.
That's right.
You, not just like, this group of people does this job and this group of people does this job. It's that specific niche that you're going to occupy that no one else possibly can.
Yeah.
And so my intuition tells me that when you pursue the thing that you get drawn into, then that's leading you towards the fulfillment of that niche that you can potentially fulfill.
I like that.
So that guidance then, though, is not a conscious guidance, right? It's coming from somewhere else in that sense. And so do you frame that towards an actual spirituality, or do you just feel like it's just intuition, I don't question it, and that kind of thing?
Jeez. Yeah. I've okay. Yeah, go. Yeah. The gas-guzzling air blower is my favorite invention. The thing that actively converts fresh air to carbon monoxide.
Yeah, there you go. And makes a bunch of noise all the time in the city.
And annoys everyone. It's great.
Yeah.
So, but there are electric ones now. Some people are using them.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. So, there's like so much I could be said on that.
Well,
so,
okay, so to tie it back into this podcast theme. Okay, so you're going to walk a path. Everybody walks a path. But if you're more mindful of it, then the path becomes a more deep meaning metaphor in that sense.
Yeah.
And then coming out of martial arts too, we often talk about path up a mountain because it's a challenge to walk that path.
Right.
But what I'm trying to get at a little bit here is just to discuss, because I think a lot of people need to hear this discussion, is the mechanism that guides you on the path isn't an empirical formulaic thing. It's not externalized, and you only get a pull.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So if you've been following that in your life, naturally that was you sort of came into that.
You're right.
Maybe just how you've honed in that skill of knowing what really is drawing you and what might be just a fancy of the mind in the moment or that kind of thing.
Okay, yeah, that's a good direction. Okay, so first of all, it's, when I say like faith, it's almost like the belief that first of all, that there is a voice to follow in the first place, right? Like I wouldn't be able to go in a direction without thinking that there was such a thing. And then my perspective of what that direction is, or, that self entails, is changed and evolved over time. And I believe that self changes and evolves over time.
Yeah.
Right? But it's also, there's an intrinsic definition to it as well, because there's like a tone. It's like a same tone that's been calling my whole life, which is the me that perhaps is the component that is almost like unchanging and constant. it's almost like the who I am, what my base intent is as a being in the universe, you know, kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you could take that idea and apply it to a person who doesn't believe that there's like a spirit or anything, right? You could be like, well, this is my makeup. This is my chemical makeup. This is what I'm born with, and this is me until I'm dead. Or you could be like, this is the larger non-physical me who's in the physical right now, but like I'm like, you know, thousands of years, millions of years old, and like I'm here just like doing a thing for now. But this probably within the course of this lifetime, I won't feel much change in fundamental impulse because the definition of the bigger who I am has been developed over eons. So it's an interesting thing to think about if you have an intrinsic self or not.
Oh yeah,
actually.
Oh yeah,
right.
And it's so important in that if you don't have that concept that you have an intrinsic self, which I think is important to tie into the idea, the concept that you have a potential that you can strive towards, right? Because I often say to people that, you know, the human being's default setting isn't a very good setting. Because a person who's not developing themselves, they don't behave in ways that are generally very helpful, and they're definitely not terribly healthy over the long run.
Right.
So a human being has to be developed, I think, in terms of if that aspiration of finding that real self-actualization is going to be there. Yeah. And so if you're going to do that, if you're going to think about that path in that sense, along the way, you come across what I often as like the shadows of the mind, the things that people, any person might want not to acknowledge about themselves, about society on a larger scale. But I think the ones about ourselves are the most challenging because then we have to really look at ourselves and take on that we have these challenges that we maybe didn't want to admit to. And so my question then would be along your path. Can you want to speak to any of the things that have popped up in that context where you're like, oh geez, I really need to step back and acknowledge that this part of myself is engaging in a way that isn't really helping me, even though it might feel like I want to keep doing that behavior?
Definitely. I think I'd probably say, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot lately, I've been seeing someone new, like recently, and it's been years since I kind of like took a hiatus from that. I think we talked about that one night recently there. Probably the fundamental, like I tend to want to refer to these things in an overarching sense before I get into particular examples.
Okay.
But basically it would be me not accepting some aspect of myself or fully allowing myself to enact how I really feel about things or how I really want to approach things. Self-editing has definitely been like the biggest stifle for me, and that probably really means justifying to people. That's like kryptonite to me because of the kind of person that I am. When I attempt to justify, and this could be an inner dialogue in my head even, justifying to myself why this or that, it can be like really destructive. And it's inauthentic because when I'm speaking with other people and then I'm busy justifying this thing, I'm not busy representing myself. I'm busy representing a self that is judged by a society that is judging with the wrong measuring stick of the person that I am.
Right.
So it's some kind of imitation newscast about Lucas, this guy that no one understands, including myself apparently. So, you know, but the thing is I do understand myself, but I have to be all right with when I listen, what I hear. And it's not to say like some big ugly truth. It's like often just what you inevitably find out is like through self-acceptance. You're like, you learn to like love all of the things. And then you realize that the thing that you thought was a bad thing about you is actually like a really sweet thing about you.
Yeah. But that's the thing about the idea of the dark shadows on the path or whatever is when you put consciousness into them, they turn into light, right? They turn into a positive generator.
Yeah, and they're amazing.
Yeah.
Like gems. Like, you can't see that they're shiny and beautiful in a black cave.
Right.
They're just jabbing you because you're stepping on them and you can't see them.
That's right. That's a good analogy.
Yeah. Right?
Totally.
Yeah.
So I think that's such an important thing too, though, is because I for myself I can relate to that in that with the different jobs I've done in my life, and teaching in particular has been interesting. This where you do have to edit yourself to some degree, anyways. And like I have fun with my students. I have fun with people in general, but I have fun with students, and they get training for a while. In my Tai Chi class, in particular, this is a good example, right? So Tai Chi, people generally think of as a very fluid and soft and all this, and that's fine. That's part of it. But if they get to know me a little bit, and then I'll say, oh, I'm a musician, and I used to play in a band, and I'm just out of curiosity, what kind of music do you think I would play, right? Because I want to see what they think by their perspective, right? Yeah. And it's usually either folk music, or new age music, right? And of course, I get to say, no, it's actually death metal. I love it. And then what, right? But you have to own that in yourself, right? Yeah. And so if I censored myself to the point I never admitted that to people, then what I'm actually doing is kind of twisting a poison in my mind about myself, where I don't want to be who I really am, right?
Right. You're like putting a story on top of you that doesn't fit you, so it doesn't respect you, and therefore you're distorting yourself to yourself.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is like no good.
And so that framework, we all wrestle with it. Though, because you don't meet somebody in a cafe for the first time or something and start talking about your deepest, darkest problems, right? Because that's not appropriate. So there is a dynamic there, but I think that the honesty really is the key thing. You engage with somebody and you're having a real dialogue. You're going to say what you actually feel is important to say. I think that that's the core of it. And so, this podcast for me has been. It is because I'm still doing it, is a vehicle for me to start to talk more openly in a way that I haven't never publicly had conversations. Right. And I think that and engage with people in that way, in that sense. And I think it's hugely valuable. It is. Yeah.
It is. Yeah. Well, in a finished comment, like actually kind of address your question a little bit, was in the context of the dating thing. It's funny because. So I'm dating this Colombian woman who, like, culturally for her, there's like a lot of things that you do together that North Americans don't. Yeah. So it's been really funny because like we'll go out. I'll be like, I'm hungry. I'm gonna pick up pizza, and she's like, oh well, you didn't offer any pizza to me. I'm like, if you wanted pizza, you just get it. Mm-hmm. Right? We're there together. Like sometimes I'll buy her something or whatever, and that's fine too. But but that's not a problem. She wasn't expecting me, like, because I'm her boyfriend, I'm gonna buy her pizza out of nowhere for no reason, which sometimes I will.
Yeah, of course.
It wasn't that bothered her. She's like, well, you're eating, so I'm like, well, the counter's there. You've got money, or if you want me to ask you to buy you, like, I will. Just ask, right? But it's a really different thing. It's like for her. That was really annoying. Mm-hmm. Like, why do you do that? Why are you so, we went into another store to buy some things. We were going to buy the same thing. And she's like, oh, well, we could have like did that order together. And I'm like, well, why would we? You're off going to get makeup and we're both buying salad, but you're like going to get your own salad. I'm going to buy some salad and then I'm not going to leave the store without you. I will wait at the checkout for you once I'm done. Yeah. Right? But this whole thing happened and it was really funny. It's like such a subtle nuance. It's like so foreign to me, right? But anyway, so I thought, but I had to think to myself, like, am I just like a selfish prick? Like I just don't even think about anybody? Like, no. But sometimes I am. Mm-hmm. Like sometimes my independence, like I'm so used to walking my own path that like I just like completely not cognizant of how me just doing my thing may affect somebody else. So, I don't know, it's not like I wouldn't say it's like a dark side thing, but it is dark in the sense that I'm completely unaware of this behavior as being a behavior at all.
Yeah, so it's that unaware thing. And then coming up against expectations. Yeah. Yeah, so that's good. So that's a really great point, and I think that's something that really a lot of people probably resonate with, because while not everybody walks their own path, there is a lot of people that are trying to embrace their own path in some way in the world right now. Yeah. And what you just said is such an important balancing thing, is your own behaviors that you've developed because you've been independent for so long, coming up against the expectations of a person from a different culture who expects some things you're not necessarily aware of, and all of this. But that's that balance that a compassionate person will seek to work through, because you don't want to be offensive, of course. You want to have a good relationship, but then there has to be some understanding and negotiations of what the expectations really are. Yeah. And so in relationships, this is important in terms of like romantic relationships, but just in relationships, just
100%.
generally. And so one of the things I want to go from there into this sort of a connector post is social dynamics in general right now. Mm-hmm. Because we're in a really strange time in history, as you know, of course.
Yeah.
And it's like 18 months now, 20 months since the pandemic popped into the world, the social dynamics between people have radically changed. And more so than I think has ever really happened in any living person's memory in North America, at least, or Western countries, at least.
Yeah.
And I'm really concerned about the loss of social connections, the importance, I think there's a lot of importance in seeing faces in public. And I'm not trying to say there's no risks. I'm not trying to claim that there's no problems out there. There are problems, there are risks.
Yeah. But with that
is this cost-benefit analysis element. And so I'm looking and seeing the overdose crisis going up through the roof, and I'm seeing that the youth, especially, their mental health has been depleted. There was a study out of the States that was saying that the average kid in the last year has put on around 15 pounds extra weight, and that's a lot of weight for a kid.
Yeah.
And not only that, but that does not come without mental health elements, because that weight is an expression of an unhealthy behavioral pattern that is going to ingrain unhealthy socialization. I mean, I could go on. I'll finish with this one before I get to my point, but I was watching a podcast with Megan Kelly, I think her name is, and she was talking about her kid, who was an 8-year-old kid, and this is in the United States. Mm-hmm. And her kid, for 1 year of school last year, was not allowed to talk to other kids at lunch. And that cannot be good for them. I just can't conceive of this being a healthy thing in the end. So anyway, from all of this stuff comes this point of the balance between interactions amongst people and where the compassion really lies and where the expectations are fair and where they're not fair. So I was wondering, like, if you'd like to speak to that element of things too, because it's a time of history.
It is. Yeah, shit. Wow, where would I begin?
Well, let's just begin with this. This one is I feel right to the core of my bones that one of the most important values we need to hold on to is the value of recognizing everybody is equally human and has a right to exist. And that nobody can take an entire group of, it's not fair to take an entire group of people and say your rights to function just are gone.
Right.
That to me just seems just wrong on its face. Never mind anything beyond that.
Yeah.
So.
Oh man. Okay, so VaxPass stuff. It's really interesting because I think that kind of being a person who's kind of like always focused on being in balance, so left and right brain, I can kind of relate to both like a conservative and a liberal kind of agenda, like understand the perspectives, I think, enough, and I can kind of flip between them. I would say if anyone asks what's my orientation overall, total liberal humanist, but...
You mean traditional liberal, I assume?
Yeah. Not now. No. I mean, it's like in like the whatever philosophical model kind of way. Of course, yeah. And like the I can't think of his name. That great book.
A liberal.
The second book was Homo Deus, and
that rings a bell.
Yeah. It was the first book. I read it not long ago. For some reason, I'm drawing a blank on it.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, I'll come back to it. Yeah. Anyway, the point is that he was talking about different base values that people operate by and like what they build a society on. Mm-hmm. And the book he's got a series of like 3 different books, and it starts with like the very beginning of humans all the way into like the development, civilization, money, culture, like all these kind of things. Harari is his last name. Yuval Noah Harari.
Okay. Cool.
And the book is called I still can't think of the book. Anyway, so it's
getting closer.
Yeah, look at his original book. It's amazing. He's a historian. He's an Israeli historian. He's an incredible guy. Yeah. So anyway, so to go on the preface that's kind of like my general orientation to things. Okay. I can imagine different scenarios and motives, which include different situations of like all the way from like a giant conspiratorial, world domination scheme, all the way to like everyone's completely innocent and trying to do the best thing. It's probably a mixture of both. Out there, there's all different motivations out there. For sure, like humans overall, like on this planet, like we seem to have achieved a degree of harmony because not everyone's in the shit all the time. In general, we're like, well, many, if not most parts of the world have like some kind of a decent momentum going. There's a daily functionality that's working. Yeah, people can live.
That's a good point.
Yeah, Like overall, and like that's the thing that keeps it together for me is like the idea that there's some things that really suck, but overall, I would say like maybe 80% of the world is like operating reasonably well.
Okay.
Which is good. That means like overall things are okay. Things and they've improved from the feudal ages. A lot. I
agree with that. Yeah.
Right? Like you and I, we don't need to worry about. I mean, we don't need to worry about tigers, but we also don't need to worry about like samurai coming to kill us today for no reason. At least at this point. So we'll see what the future brings. But right. But anyway, so I like to start there, and then think that all right. Fundamentally. And this is really, I think the devil's in the details. And I think the problem is that, as in the North America at least, in terms of like the whole pandemic thing, is that we've been kind of left out of a lot of the details. For me, in a democratic society where people vote for things, I believe that this health crisis should have been something that involved a vote of some kind.
Sure.
Even if everyone said whatever thing that they would agree to that makes it the same as it is now, knowing that I had a say in it would make a difference for how I feel about everything.
Yeah.
And yes, we did vote for the politicians that blah, 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 but those politicians had no idea what they were getting into when they got voted in. Yeah. They weren't like, there's going to be a pandemic, so these are my views. Like, there was none of that.
Absolutely.
It was a thing that literally didn't exist.
Yeah.
Well, in the last while anyway, in the last 15 years or whatever.
At scale.
At this scale.
Yeah.
So like, I don't know if maybe people would have made a different choice had they known what people's platforms were about that kind of situation. But it would have been nice to know that there was a choice involved.
Ah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
I
can say a lot more, but like I'll let you.
Okay. Yeah. Well. So that's such an important point though, because I think choice comes back to this idea that the person has to follow their path.
Yeah.
Right? So your path might come to a place where you have to make a choice that is between things that aren't, neither of them are particularly good choices.
Right.
But you still got to make that choice. But if somebody comes along in that moment and says, no, you're going to do this, it changes the dynamic of that situation completely because it's not your choice to go down that path.
Right.
And I think that strikes at one of the major flaws in the last year and a half, 2 years, whatever. And I think you're very right. It's not giving the people enough of a chance to make the choices. It's just being told to you, this is what we're going to do. So that element is very much problematic. And I think, and then you also mentioned the idea that it's not clear exactly what's happening anyways, that a lot of the information is questionable, and then some of it has obviously been manipulated through a certain perspective, a certain agenda. I always point to the lab leak hypothesis as a prime example of something where there's a lot of evidence indicating this is possible, but you talk to certain people, they just won't even acknowledge it, and then you're not getting to the reality that's there that you're trying to find. Yeah.
You can't grab onto really anything.
Right.
Because it's very removed.
Right. And so
yeah,
we go down this path, we go down this route here in this way, where the information is shoddy and the decisions are not being made in a very democratic sense. There's not a lot of choice being involved in them.
In a democratic society.
Like
that's my issue, right?
Yeah.
It's like if we were a communist society and our whole way, which is there's no right way to live, in my perspective. If you're a communist society and everyone's on board with like, you know what, we've decided that whatever the governing body says about my body is okay, then okay. But the problem is that suddenly our political orientation is not, I don't feel like it's being acknowledged. Like, I was brought up to be a liberal humanist, fundamentally. Sure. Like, my country shaped me in a capitalist society to be self-determined.
Yeah.
And now you're telling me to embrace communist values? About my health, specifically?
Of all things, yeah.
Of all things, in a society that whose advertising, whose media and everything says you are an individual and the power of the individual decision matters the most.
Yeah.
The power of the individual, the voter, you're the center of your life, and you matter. Your feelings matter. What's all this stuff about bullying and all that stuff for the last while? It's like, it's all about your individual, like, right to be the way you want to be.
Yes.
And now we're just throwing that out. Anyway, so I'll give it back to you.
But that's it. That's what I was pointing at. Is this and this is something that is one of these things I see as, for most people, a bit of a shadow in the mind, in that they're not really engaging with the ramifications of what that decision really entails.
Yes. Yeah, right? Yeah.
Because it's coming out of sort of a panicky sort of response, and that's a fear-based thing. And so the play out of this is crazy. And I know of a couple guys whose opinions are just so off kilter right now. And it's because the information being presented is questionable to some degree in certain ways, but they're not good at deciphering what is more valid in terms of what's presented and what is less valid, and separating the wheat from the chaff. So they're going down into the craziest of conspiracy realms, and that's not helping them. That's not giving them any better grounding and ability to function through this problem, right?
That's true.
And I really, and so what I see is a lot of people trying to blame the people that are not playing the game, playing along, right? They're anti-vax, which is just a stupid term, because it doesn't encapsulate what the real resistance is. But they're trying to blame people for the problems that are continuing. Yeah. Instead of looking at the government who made the policies that created this outcome. Yeah. So the analogy that I often use I've been using is, if I went to a bar and started picking fights and then got beat up, it's not really the person who beat me up's fault entirely. It's still partly my fault for going out and causing that problem. Right. And that the government should, in this analogy, the government should know that creating these divisive policies and creating this segmentation or separation in societal groups is going to lead to more problems. Yeah. And yet they sort of come across as if they're surprised when people, get frustrated about it. That's
Why are you protesting at the hospital? We don't understand. It's like, well,
what do you expect? like you can't keep pushing people without a response. Yeah. Yeah. So definitely, yeah. So that one, it bugs me, because I don't want society to get worse. I want society to get better. And I just know that human beings are human beings. And I mentioned to people quite a bit too, and I was here in the Stanley Cup riot that happened.
Me too.
Yeah, you saw that.
I ran away just as before it began, because I felt it in the air. Yeah. I ran to Yaletown and watched the smokestack in the distance.
And the helicopters flying over and shit. Yeah. So I was jamming with my band at the time, and we came outside for an air break, and we said, "Oh my God, what's going on?"
And then you go outside, you're like, "Whoa, the world's doing it too!"
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much.
That's awesome.
But it was a good memory. But it was a good memory. But it was a memory,
a poignant memory.
Yes. But that happened over a hockey game.
Like over nothing.
A
pretend thing.
A game, right? Yeah. And so the idea that our politicians don't have the reasons to understand that the population, if pushed too hard, could collapse into chaos. There's no excuse for them not to know that. They should know.
And history's full of that. Yeah. There's a lot of evidence. There's a lot of reading you can do in Google to learn.
Oh, it's all over the place. Yeah. So I really find that frustrating in that sense. Yeah. So in saying all these interesting threads that we've pulled on and gone through, I'd like to sort of wrap things up with going in towards the idea of, if not solutions, directions that might be aimed at that could potentially make things better. So for myself, one of the first things I think about, and this is in context of COVID, but much more, is just taking responsibility for your own health. Mm-hmm. So I said this on one of my first podcasts, talking with somebody, is I find it abhorrent that there's been these get a vaccine and get a free donut offers. It just blows my mind, because this is coming from a health official who's supposed to be responsible for health, and the message is the vaccine. And I'm not saying anything negative about the vaccines at all. I'm not.
For sure.
I'm not in that position, but your diet will have an effect on your health. And if you eat a bunch of crappy food and then get a vaccine, it's not an excuse to keep eating crappy food, right? You've got to take that responsibility. So eating healthy, getting regular exercise, which includes, stretching and some muscle resistance, a variety of different things.
Yeah.
Getting somewhat regular sleep. And one of the big things that I always tell people on top of those is having good relationships with other people. Because that's where the value of your life is really going to be experienced. So that's where I start with in terms of practical directions to aim at that will help. They may not be perfect solutions because nothing is, but they're in that direction. So if you have anything you want to throw in on that.
Yeah. For me, I don't know, like I have my own routine, which I kind of share with people often enough, like in terms of, I got friends that ask me, I don't know, a lot of people say I look young for my age, which is cool. I'm working on improving that further. Yeah. But it really became a kick that started actually just before COVID. Yeah, I have right now I've been experimenting and changing it. It's been a daily exercise routine for the last year and a half. Now it's a bi-daily, or every other day.
Okay.
Thing, workout.
Oh, yeah, I get it.
Yeah, the workout routine is a half-hour thing, and then plus a run of 20 minutes. Yeah. Not a big deal. It's a series of stretches, push-ups, sit-ups, things like that. Yeah. Stretches. So, I have to say that I wouldn't be able to cope well emotionally with things if I didn't do that. Because I've experimented with taking okay, let's just stop for a week, see what happens. It's yeah. Capability, ease of processing emotional data even is just no good.
So so that's exercise. And then I know you care about your food.
I made some pretty crazy diet changes too. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I eat a lot less. Yeah. And for me, there's different bodies and different blood types and all that, but for me it's going towards fresh vegetables. Yeah. I cut out grain almost entirely from my diet. I don't consider it a food. I consider wheat cake. Yeah, yeah. Doesn't matter what form it turns into sugar. Yeah. Right? So
that's right.
Yeah. So I went down 4 pant sizes in a year.
Oh yeah, good.
Yeah, just from that change and reducing my sugar consumption, which again, wheat is part of that. So that's nice. Did that. The exercise thing. The last little while is meditation. 5 minutes a day. I can do more. 5 minutes a day. I do my routine, take my shower. Meditating, clear the mind, at least 5 minutes. I have a little egg timer.
Yeah. That's it. So that to me that would sound like a good basis to go forward from into your day, into your life, and it keeps you going in that sense. So that's the value of the simple dietary, exercise based, and then I'm sure you're aware that sleeping patterns matter too, and that
all
kind
that,
of thing. Yeah. But then I think that one of the big keys to that too is really placing value on the relationships with other people that you have.
Yeah.
And having that honesty about that, the expectations and working through those challenges where you might not see eye to eye with someone, but you're humble enough to say, okay, I'm going to go back and adjust to make this work, because the relationship overall, and it's not just romantic relationships, but whatever relationship you have, is more important than, a particular moment where I have to be right? My mom always said that you can be right or you can be happy.
I love that.
Yeah,
totally.
And so that's another aim that I think we can look at, because people tell me sometimes that they think that the Zoom meetings are about as good as meeting in person, and I just no, they're just not.
For me.
I don't think they are for anyone who's really honest about it, or at least conscious enough to really evaluate that. But that dynamic of interaction in person is wired into your nervous system, into your fundamental thing.
Oh, we're transferring chemicals all the time, and for sure, there's a literal difference between physical and not physical. I mean, we know that when we talk about lovers, but even proximity to a person is.
Well, it matters. It matters, and there's value in it that isn't being sort of acknowledged very well right now. Yeah. And so that's another element of the aims that could go towards a better world, I think. But the caveat to me that's so important is if a person or group of people don't aim in those directions. And I say aim because I don't want to say that you're going to achieve a perfection, because that's not really the reality. But the aim to those directions, that society that they function in can't function itself very well for long term. It's going to have serious issues pop up. And so it's not just the COVID issues. This is the totality of how we're going to move forward in general, I think, in that sense. And so yeah, we have our basics. We have food, water, shelter, relationships with other people, and going forward from there. Now, to me, a more subtle layer of potential solution thinking is in the development of a more whole brain perspective. So if a person is naturally really drawn to mathematics and left brain formulaic thinking, having them also develop some artistic understanding as well. Because I find that, and I've met a lot of artists, and I know a lot of people that are very left brain, right? I've known a lot of people.
Right.
But encouraging that cross contamination or cross pollination is probably a better word for it.
Yeah.
Because so for instance, people that work say in industry that like construction or something, and their whole life is built around building things, and they have to be functionally viable to build. So that's where their main focus goes. It's got to be right. They don't understand and appreciate the nature of the artist's need to create in a way that isn't just like on the clock. Like, So that because that's a different function of the brain and a different expression of the person. So I think that's a good aim.
For sure. Yeah, and maybe part of that could be like fostering. You know, I read this book called The Molecule of More. Don't ask me the author's name now, but I remember the title of that one.
That's a good title.
Yeah. And it's about dopamine.
Oh yeah.
And it talks about dopaminic personalities versus what they called H and N, here and now chemicals, which is like a whole other list of chemicals. But they're like basically dopamine is really high in, like, it was really interesting. It talked about political differences as being associated with those chemical dominances in different people's brains, and how through experimentation they're actually able to like introduce more dopamine, and the person became like more liberal versus the opposite, and like really interesting stuff.
That's very interesting.
It is, yeah. And it's just to realize that like certain people can't access what you're saying because they're like literally in a chemically different place, and that might be able to be introduced. Like I think that all of us have experienced at some point, more or less, of different chemicals, you know, and different perspectives depending on our age and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yep.
So it's like trying to bridge that to some degree, or like giving society a model. Like these would be great things in school. It's like, imagine you're the type of person whose priority is to conserve. Imagine you're a person whose priority is to change things. Like this is the difference between your two major political parties. Yeah. So what would I do if I was like this? What would I do if I was like this?
That's right. Yeah, because you will have a natural sort of inclination for your own self. Yeah. But the appreciation of the different perspectives gives you a far more sort of a flexible position in society, and you can relate to others better. And if you can relate to others better, it's less likely you're going to want to tell them what to do. You're going to have totalitarian instincts. That's the bit.
Yeah. Like that's when people say like, well, what's your perspective on? It's like, well, I don't have a perspective. Like I do because I'm a person. So obviously I have a perspective, but like I don't know. Like I'm a scientist, like in the really simple sense of like I believe in the scientific idea of how to approach problems, which is starts at I don't know and continues with I don't know, and maybe I can be less wrong.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Right? Let's see if I can be less wrong.
Yeah.
Let's try things out. Yeah. So for me, like I love the ideal there, like of science and the way that like, and that's what I think we felt like a lot society's gone off track a little bit here because science turned into politics, turned into media, turned into, and it's not science anymore. So people like, trust the science. It's like, well, you can't trust science because that's to imply that it's like a particular kind of religion. Like there's a thought frame. When people say trust the science, I just hear them saying trust the results. But science itself is not about the results. It's about hypotheses.
Yeah. So
anyway, so understanding other people and then humoring all possibilities.
Well, that's a whole thread. But I think the thing that you hit on there that I think is so important for this idea of coming to some kind of idea of solutional thinking, solutional ends, is how people can not understand other perspectives because those perspectives require literal biochemical states that person isn't able to access. And so there's two things there that I think are very important. One of them is early childhood education that actually gets kids to become, gives an opening to explore both sides of that equation. Right? In a really, in an intentional way. And I know that some of the alternative schools like Montessori and such have some interesting programming around that where they try to develop that, but I think it could be done a lot better.
Definitely.
And especially on a larger scale.
Yeah, more widespread,
Yeah, so there's that. But then I also think that as, let's say, going down to young adults, is I'm really interested in the work of what's called psychedelic drugs then.
Yeah.
So the use of psilocybin from mushrooms and MDMA. What do you say? MDMA?
Yeah, MDMA.
MDMA. I always, my tongue always goes when I do that one. But the genuine research into it is fascinating.
Yeah.
And the reason I think it's fascinating, the framework I'm building in my own understanding, is that if you look at the herbal taxonomy of, say, Chinese medicine, there is some herbs that are for Shen disorders. And the Shen is the way of describing the mind. So mental disorders really is what they're saying. Well, these natural occurring plants like mushrooms and such, they have an incredible effect on the mind. That's a power. And like a sword has power, that could be used for good or ill, right? In that sense. But the potential for getting people's minds to perceive the world through lenses they would normally have not been able to access seems so profoundly useful at a time when we're literally almost killing ourselves as a species for not developing that more open understanding.
Definitely.
Yeah. So do you have thoughts on that subject at all in that sense?
I think it's great. Like personally, I have limited experience with psychedelics and neurotropics and things like that. I do have enough to go off of. I'm really sensitive, so I have to be really careful about pretty much anything I put in my body, which has been an interesting subject, with the vax and all that too, right? Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know, like to me, any type of medicine, whether it's therapy or a mushroom or whatever, that puts you in the space where you can be more, I mean, we'll just bring it back to the beginning subject, where you can be like more self-accepting. I think when you accept yourself, you can accept other people. Yeah. Right? So then you become a lot more benevolent and balanced. Yeah. And then you might be able to suppose that even if you can't conceptualize what the other person's thinking, that you could humor them.
Yeah. It's something.
Right?
Yeah, it's a start.
Yeah. And that would be great. Like that's the issue that I've had, like when people have said, oh, well, do you think this or that, why do you choose this or that? Do you see it this way about like the vaccine thing? Great example. Is like, well, no, actually, like my problem is that people who see it one way have a problem with other people seeing it in a different way. Like to me, like that's the problem. It's not this or that. It's like, well, hold on. Are you considering all perspectives and then honoring your own point in it? I don't care what you think. It's all good. Just don't get on my case about what I think. Because honestly, like, what's your goal? Is it like truth or is it justification?
Yeah. Yes. And my understanding of especially the idea of having consciousness expanding experience is that you do develop not only an appreciation for other perspectives, but you understand that you have no right to interfere with that person's belief systems of themselves and their own lives. And that's different than a person who commits an outright crime. So my experience of having consciousness expansion sort of come upon you during an experience gave me this perspective where helped me refine it. I wouldn't say it gave me that, because it helped me refine it and understand it is a better way to put it, where the other person, and it could be the other person or the other being, whatever it is, this other that exists impartial to you, you have no ability, never mind right, to force their thinking and to be in a certain way. You can't actually do it anyways. So if you think of even torturing somebody or something, you can get them to kind of snap and do what you need them to do, but that's out of desperation. They're not genuinely wanting to take up things. So the idea then is, if you want to progress forward to me, and we want to use these ingredients like a healthy lifestyle, good relationships, and willingness to expand consciousness to envelop things that aren't normally natural to the individual but more expansive, that has to be done through this compassionate lens in which every individual and their path is given the right to exist without interference.
Yeah.
And of course, I always put the caveat and say that does not give people an excuse to commit crimes. Crimes are a different thing. It's I don't care what kind of music you listen to. Ultimately, it's really up to you. It's your life, your desire. Self-determination.
Yeah.
But if you do interfere with other people's lives, you steal from them, you hurt them.
You're in a different game.
They're totally, and that's not okay. So that balance though. But to me, that's that's the aim that I think is the most productive and most practical and useful, is to go towards is kind of putting all those things in a stew and getting them to kind of work with the healthy lifestyle, the healthy relationships, the willingness to take on self-reflection, and pushing yourself to expand your conscious perspective so that you can not just understand people that are, say, on the other political side to you, but try understanding what it might be like to be an indigenous person in Papua New Guinea. Right? To really expand. Where do you really see the world from? Like, and how would that change your perspective now? And all those things. I think those are workable solutions, if not, they're not perfected ends, but there's something to chew on in that sense.
Yeah.
So.
Well, yeah, it becomes an open dialogue rather than a closed one. Yeah. Basically.
And that, of course, is kind of what this whole conversation was about. Was trying to do that, and it was a great conversation. So I want to thank you for your time.
Yeah.
And say that I wish you the best. If people want to check out your art and your web design and such, I'm going to have some links at the bottom of the page, so you can check that out. And anything else you want to finish up with, Paul?
No, it's good. No, I like it. It was great.
Yeah.
It was like a nice encapsulation of a conversation. Yeah. So
I appreciate it too, man. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Likewise. Okay.